Happy Friday, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and just welcome us, and then we're going to dive right in. I know there's a lot to cover this morning. So hello and welcome. My name is Mark Hallett, and I'm Director of Grants Programs at Illinois Humanities. We are so excited to have you join us today for one of two special grantee webinars on communications and on branding. So this webinar is part of our ongoing commitment to supporting our grantee partners by providing tools and resources to help you build and expand your capacity in different ways. Branding, of course, plays a critical role within the context of communications. Today's webinar is going to be hosted by the talented team at Pubic Communications, Inc., or PCI. We know many of you are doing amazing work in this arena already, so we hope that everyone finds new framing and new strategies and new tactics that are helpful. So I wanted to take a moment to thank the PCI team in advance for joining us this morning and for putting all of this together. Before I turn it over, I also wanted to note that we're going to hold time at the end for any questions. So just jot them down, or if you want, go ahead and put them in the chat as they occur to you. And also that a recording of the webinar is going to be provided in the new year alongside of all the materials covered throughout the training. So without any further delay, I want to hand this over to the team at PCI, and thank you again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you so much, Mark, and good morning, everyone. So happy to be here with you all and have this important conversation. As Mark mentioned, we are going to talk about your brand and how strong branding drives mission impact and engagement. We're going to learn about the idea of branding within communications, importance of brand integrity, why it matters, the implications of brand inconsistencies, and why it can be a challenge for organizations. We'll also talk through best practices for implementing brand integrity, so procedures and templates and just the best practices and strategies that you all can put in place. But we know that sometimes staffing could be stretched. So we'll give you practical best practices that you can put into play without stretching that bandwidth that might be already stretched. But before we get into that, I'm going to introduce ourselves. As Mark mentioned, we are from Pubic Communications, Inc., PCI. We've been around for over 60 years. We're an integrated communications firm here in the city. We work across many sectors, including nonprofits, businesses, government, healthcare, conservation. We have worked with arts organizations and social service organizations. And my name is Ramsey Carey. I'm the Vice President of the Nonprofit Business and Government Sector.
And my name is Jackie Rachev, and I work closely with Ramsey. I'm her Senior Account Supervisor, and I focus on supporting social service agencies and small municipalities, libraries, and things of that nature. So now, on with the show. So what is branding? And if you took a quick survey of people on the street, a lot of people would say, oh, it's a logo. It's your visual identity. It's what people visually think of when you mention an organization's name or a company's name or something of that nature. And that's true. It is your logo, but it's also your identity as a whole. And if you think about personal branding, that is exactly what it is. It's not just your logo, but it's how you present yourself. It's your viewpoint. It's your organization's viewpoint. It's your values. It's what you stand for. And it's the behaviors that you do to support those values and to forward that viewpoint. But most importantly, it is ultimately a promise that you are making to your clients, to your participants, to your donors, that you're going to use their resources appropriately to forward your mission and your vision and your values. And so let's think about, as Mark mentioned, branding is a very large part of communications. It is not separate from, rather, a very large part of it. communications is also a part of your branding. They go together. You cannot have one without the other. So when you're thinking about all the materials and all the ways that you are communicating about your organization and what your organization does and what it stands for and who it works for and the values that you put forward, your brand, your viewpoint, your values need to be represented in all of those types of communications. And how you communicate your values and your vision and your mission and your promise is a large part of your brand. So as you can see, they're not separate. They're very much a part of each other's lives. They're very much integrated. And this matters because it creates instant recognizable identity. It reinforces what you're telling your public, your audience, those that are coming to you for service or coming for music or sharing their financial or time resources. This is your identity, and they're coming to you because of that identity. And it continues good use of branding and reinforcing all of that. And consistency will continue to build the trust among the people who your livelihood depends on, the people that you serve, and the people who provide you the resources to do just that. And ultimately, it will help to protect your organization in times of, in instances of crises or uncertainty when you have to start to make some tough decisions. So here are a couple examples that we have done for branding and your communications in the nonprofit arena. We recently worked with the Generosity Commission a couple years ago, and they went through an entire branding process, which includes not only visual identities, as we briefly prelude, but style guide. There's email templates, there's social media templates, there's press release templates, there are toolkits that their staff and their donors and their board can use, and just this lays out how the Generosity Commission talks about itself, what its key points are, how the materials look, because you want them to look alike and cohesive and similar, because then somebody can say, oh, yep, that came from the Generosity Commission, or that came from Habitat for Humanity, and things like that. So let's talk about visual identity, since that is often the first thing people think of. Here you see, I think 15 easily recognizable logos, right? This Nike swoosh at the top, you don't even have to put the word Nike and you know what that is. You've got your apple, which has gone through an iteration of color changes. Here's the Habitat for Humanity, Feeding America, Home Depot. So what makes these logos good logos is that they're recognizable. They have a strong recognizable color palette. They tend to evoke a memory or an emotion that you have from working with them. And some of these logos, actually, you can tell what their mission is based on the visual identity here. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Recognizable or memorable. As I mentioned earlier, you've got the Nike swoosh and the apple. You don't even have to put the name of the organization or the company there. You know exactly who that is. The NBA logo has been iconic for decades. And Macy's, although we may prefer Marshall Field's, Macy is recognizable because we see it every Thanksgiving Thursday during their parade and for the Christmas season. So here are some organizations that have really leaned into their color palette when working with their visual identity. The iconic golden arches, right? You don't have to, you could go anywhere in the world and you know that you see golden arches with the red, it's going to be a McDonald's location. Google has worked with the primary colors. And that goes back to our school days when you used originally Google was used for learning, and they have embraced an educational section to their work. The primary colors speak into that mission, right? IKEA, that's the color of the Swedish flag. And then Home Depot, this is a brand new version of their logo. It's the same orange. We all know that famous Home Depot orange, right? Now, let's talk about trust and emotions and memories when it comes to our logos. PBS, that has all three, right? Trust, emotion, and a memory. We trust PBS because they do documentaries and they have solid, consistent reporting in news, and they're fairly balanced, and they spend time on their reporting and their storytelling. So we know that they're trustworthy. And many of us remember the PBS pledge drives. There's a memory when you see that logo. And then there's the emotion, maybe Sesame Street or Daniel Tiger. So PBS really wraps up all of those emotions. On the other side of the screen, you've got the bears, and that, whether good or bad, elicits a memory for a lot of Chicagoans. People who, children who go to the games with their parents or their grandparents, or remember the excitement around the 1985 Bears Super Bowl, or the excitement now that Caleb Williams is #1 quarterback and could be a franchise. So there's memories and emotions tied into our logos as well. And then moving into how we use some of those logos to help build our reputation and our brand trust. So definitely recognition. That's always the first thing we want with anything we want with our brand. And here are the top 5 trusted brands in the US, as told to us by Morgan Consult's most trusted brands. But why are they so trusted? They're trusted because they provide consistent product and service delivery. They also evoke emotion. In Band-Aid's case, you skin your knee, and what does your mom or your grandma or your auntie or uncle do? They clean your scrape, they give it a kiss, and they put a Band-Aid on it. And that takes care of us. That gives us that warm, fuzzy, we were taken care of emotion, and that equals trust. They also have fairly decent customer service. Amazon, for as large as it can be, one of the things people like about working with Amazon is you can order something and ship it back if you don't like it with very little hassle in general. There are always those outliers and certain situations, but in general, there's very little hassle to making a return on Amazon. And that is something that customers like. And then they tend to live their values. They are upfront about their values. Kleenex is there in a time of happy and joyful tears and hurt and pain. And they do it in a fun, embracing manner. And that is consistent with their values, which is why they are so trusted. So let's talk about some of these logos that are aligned with their mission. Feeding America, you know exactly what they're doing. They've got the stalk of wheat or a grain here. You know they're feeding people who are hungry, and they're helping to put an end to food insecurity. Jeep, this logo right here is the front of their Jeep. There are the 2 headlights and the air intake areas. Human rights campaign, equality, that is what they're working for. United Way, the open palm with the stick figure there, they're giving a hand up. They're reaching out a helping hand. American Red Cross, you've got the cross there, and across the world, it's either the Red Cross or the Red Crescent, but you know what they're offering. They're offering support, safety, and help after disasters or blood drives. They're helping people. And then Habitat for Humanity, they're building houses, and it's right here in their logo. Here's a family under a house. So informal poll. So now think about your organization's brand. Think about what colors you use, what values you stand behind, what your logo is. And in the chat box below, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 not being very recognizable and 5 being very recognizable within the city of Chicago, how do you rate your organization's brand? So go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll discuss that. All right, I'm seeing a 1 and a 4. Okay. And if you're not from Chicago, I realize that we are talking to everybody across the state of Illinois, in your area. Are you recognizable in your city? Are you recognizable throughout the state, the area that you serve? Okay, so I'm seeing some 4s, which is great. We've got a 3, couple 3s, and some 1 and 2s. Okay, so that's a that's a nice mix. So let's talk with Ramsey. She's going to tell us what is brand integrity and how we can make that work for your organizations.
Yes. And thank you all for sharing those ranges. We've seen it all. We've seen logos that are not as recognizable, or logos that are very recognizable in the, I would say, in the Chicago, Illinois area, especially when it comes to nonprofits and just organizations in the humanities area. And so part of building that recognizable brand is having that integrity attached to it. And so integrity is that acting with strong ethical practices, that accountability, the honest, the transparency, the relationship that you all have with your key audiences. And then you pair that with your brand, and you're looking at the consistency and alignment of the action, the services that you all provide to your audiences, the messaging, the way that you all talk about yourselves in a consistent manner, and your values, reinforcing that at every point of the way. Not putting a photo out there that doesn't align with your values or your mission. That's part of that consistency and alignment between brand and integrity. And it has to be across all aspects of the organization, from operations to communications to any public interactions. If you have a volunteer coordinator, they should be working from the same message framework when they're talking with volunteers as the communications team, and making sure that they're talking about the organization in the same tone, the same voice, the same energy. The messages might be a little tailored, and we'll talk about that in a few, but it's the essence that remains the same of what you all stand for. And why does it matter? Again, we talk about trust and loyalty. We'll talk about that a lot throughout this session, but it builds that trust and loyalty. It makes your brand stand out. And it also protects your reputation. Your reputation is your bread and butter. How people think of you and your organization, it matters. So when audiences see your visual brand or they hear your name, they should immediately think about your impact, what you stand for, who you stand for, and the difference you make in the communities that you serve. So who's responsible for this? Rhetorical question. Next question. Everybody. Everybody is responsible for this. From the top down, everyone plays a role in enforcing brand integrity and acting in the way with integrity on behalf of the organization. If you're a junior team member, your CEO, everyone should be on the same page, working from the same framework as it pertains to enforcing this integrity for your brand. So some examples of how brand can integrity can inconsistently show up across organizations and some of the challenges that we've seen organizations have in enforcing this. You have departments who might be using outdated logo files across the organization, creating promotional materials that are not necessarily aligned with the brand guideline or the mission, or has a tagline that doesn't really fit, but it fits for that event, but it really doesn't match within the full value and mission framework for the organization. You might have staff who are public facing and talking about the organization in not incorrectly, but not in the tone in which you all want people to take away when they hear about your organization and your mission. It also causes third-party miscommunication. You might have partners or other volunteers who are speaking on your behalf incorrectly. Also, just the inconsistent messaging and fundraising. And I think that is a huge point here and a huge challenge that people are having. When you have inconsistent messaging and fundraising, you confuse your donors, your funders. They don't know what they're putting their resources towards for your organization. So that messaging has to be consistent across the board. What is the impact of their dollars? How does it align with your mission? That is an inconsistency that can cause a lot of challenges for your bottom line if it's not streamlined. So, another reflection moment. Think about if your organization has a clear process for brand consistency. Do you know, are there roles and responsibilities that are clearly defined for managing, let's say, the visual assets, the brand managing across the departments? Reflect on that for a second and then answer this question. What are some potential challenges to ensuring brand consistency across an organization? Seeing multiple messengers. Yes. Not one communications person. Yep. Not having a clear process, I tell you, that is a common challenge. And having a large volunteers who want to be advocates, that's, definitely a challenge and an opportunity if they do have the guidelines and the messaging to support what they're saying on behalf of the organization and training and all of those opportunities. So you can flip that challenge into an opportunity with a process, with guidelines. We'll talk about that in a second. The visions of the board and staff may not be properly communicated with each other. Yep. You all are citing lots of the common challenges. So when we look at these challenges and what it can do for organization or how it can negatively impact an organization, we talked about brand and brand risk or reputation and brand risk. It can lead to poor decision-making, not rooted in your values. You might partake in unethical practices, not on purpose, but because you thought maybe this was a great idea for right now, but you didn't look at your mission to see if it aligned with what you all are trying to accomplish in your audiences and what they want from you all. And it undermines that trust and credibility when you make some of those decisions because you're not rooted in that value. The inconsistencies, just the untrustworthy, it's a source of misinformation. If the messaging is not clear about who you stand for, what you do, if the logos and graphics don't align with it and they're inconsistent, you have one logo here and then you have another logo and there's just no synergy between the two. When you have untrustworthy or rotating spokespeople, when they're not prepped and armed with the talking points, with the messaging, and practicing along the way, that can lead to mistrust in the media and any of those public settings in which they're speaking on behalf of the organization. The values and versus behaviors, again, that decision making. My behavior is based on the values that our organization stands for. I'm making this decision because this leads to this impact. I'm making this decision because this audience will be positively impacted by this. So all of those make a difference. Even when you're thinking about your voice on digital or even your voice in the public sphere, when you're talking about, let's say, major topics, civic discussion, is that something that your organization should speak on? Should you issue a statement on that issue? So not being rooted in your values and your brand can cause you to speak on an issue that maybe doesn't align with your, and that could cause more issues for you all down the line. So you have to be very clear on what you stand for, so those behaviors and decision makings are aligned. Also, sometimes you might end up partnering with an organization that doesn't necessarily align with your mission. So if you don't have a strong handle on your brand, partners might say, well, this seems like a great idea. And then you realize that this is not aligned. This is not aligned in a positive way. It's not going to make an impact for the audiences that we serve. It's not going to help our bottom line. So having all of that consistency will help you make informed decisions about your business operations, your communications, and your impact. So we start by the process. I know a lot of folks said we don't have a clear process. It is a process to build brand integrity. And so we encourage everyone to control what you can control. Start internally, start at home, start with your staff, start with your board of directors, trustees, commissioners, volunteers, anyone that is privy to internal information. Start there. And the way that you can mitigate that is identifying who is responsible for the branding of the organization. If you don't have a dedicated marketing communications team or department or manager, is there someone in that realm that can own this, can be the keeper of all of this information, can develop this information, but also bringing in your leadership. So whoever is appointed to that should be appointed by the leadership team. So there is that uniformed decision-making from the top to the people who are going to be responsible for this. And then defining your brand guidelines, having a style guide, understanding what your tone of voice is, understanding who your audiences are and the channels in which you want to reach them, understanding what your visual identity, and then putting that in paper, documenting it into a guide, a tangible guide that can be shared with everyone. And then centralizing all of these materials. So it's a cloud storage, it's Dropbox, it's Google Drive, whatever works best for your organization. It should be in a centralized location where anybody can pull it at any point. They can pull those guidelines. They can pull your boilerplate, which describes what your organization is. They can pull a logo so they're using the proper one. And then taking the time to train and educate your staff and external partners about how to use your brand consistently. For example, we showed some of those, we showed examples of a social toolkit. Those social toolkits should be used with your external partners, and they should have guidelines on how to use your messaging. They should have guidelines on how to incorporate a logo into any partner materials. They should have guidelines on how to accredit, your photos, your visual assets, whatever it might be. Those guidelines are important to communicate to external partners. Then also making sure that your staff is informed on how to give that training and guidance to them. And then you should have an approval and feedback process. Oftentimes, again, if you're in siloed departments, you might have an education department who is pushing out their materials for their programs, and it might not be aligned with the organization brand. So to avoid that, we recommend having an approval process in place. Whoever you all identify as your brand stewards, those should be the people that are approving these materials before they go out. used. You should have a process in which they can provide that feedback and say, hey, actually, I think you're using an outdated logo. Let me get you the right logo. Or, hey, actually, right now, we're prioritizing this in communications. Would you all mind including this messaging in this so that it aligns towards our business goals and our communication goals? And there's just consistency in terms of what we're putting out there in the world about our organization and our program offerings. And then audit and refresh. Take the time to look at it. If it's quarterly, if it's annually, look at your materials and say, is it time for us to refresh? How are people using our materials? Are we pleased with the feedback that we're getting from our key stakeholders? And that also might include issuing a survey to your key stakeholders about your brand. So then you can be informed on how they see your brand and if there are any changes that you all want to make in that refresh. But you're always evolving as an organization, and your brand and your visual identity and your materials should evolve with you.
Okay, so as Ramsey had noted, the brand integrity is a continuing process and everything needs to carry through. Not only materials, but your communication from your leadership. The assumption is, and we have seen way too often, internal communications will be leaked to external sources. We've seen that in government, we've seen that in business, we've seen that in nonprofit. So leadership, communications from leadership should continue to uphold brand standards, brand language, how you speak about the work you do, how you speak about the people you serve and the impact you make in the community you serve, how you speak about your donors and your partners. Internal employee communications from one department to another, or from HR, or from volunteers to a staff member, should also carry the brand standards, as well as anything that Ramsey mentioned, going to your clients, your donors, your partners. Everything needs to be personalized to each audience, and the tone may be slightly different, but your core identity, again, your values and what you stand for and who you're serving and why, that needs to come through in every single piece or every single talking point or every speech somebody makes or gives or a presentation you may give to a funder. It will be tailored to your audience, but it needs to keep your core identity. Digital communications, media, multimedia, the same thing. You will see it's breadcrumbs from each piece to the next piece, to the next piece, to the next piece. If you imagine a large folder or if you've gone to present a portfolio, if you're, imagine you're an artist and you're presenting a portfolio of what represents the work you've done, your branding is very similar. It's carried throughout your entire portfolio of any communication. It could go down so much as how you dress and the colors you wear when you present. I used to work for a social service, and one of their main colors was red. So whenever I was presenting on behalf of that organization, I always wore red. Now, if we go to the brand style guidelines that Ramsey had referenced earlier, this is a sample of what PCI put together. And I'll tell you, I have this on quick access and I use it consistently. And for someone who's been in the area of communications and public relations for several decades, this is still one of the key things I have up on my desktop all the time. This is an example of our logo, and we have guidance on how we can use our logo to thank donors within partnerships. This is the main here, our main color. And there are codes. You can see here our PMS color codes. We also have information about the types of fonts we can use, what is our headline font, What is our subhead font? What is our body copy font? It's Chronicle display here. If you look over here in the bottom left-hand corner, this is how we expect to see press releases about PCI or PCI activities or staff members. This is our headline. This is our subhead. This is our body copy. And we do look at this on a regular basis and provide feedback and updates and reissue to staff. And this is in a centralized location that has to do with branding, which would make sense. In terms of do this, not that, and examples, here you can see here we have over examples of ways not to use our logo. We cannot use our logo in any of these ways. We cannot put the little thought bubble P on its side. We cannot make it a different color, even though we do have a secondary color palettes. We cannot use the main logo in one of those colors. It does not go on a blue that does not provide enough contrast. It cannot be used without the visual thought bubble. It can't be, there cannot be a logo lockup with the cat, as cute as it is. So this is all to make sure that we are instantly recognizable when you see this logo. Oh, yep, I know who that is. I know who PCI is. And they work with a lot of nonprofit organizations so that they can get their work done. Their stuff's always good. No worries there. And it adds to our trust. Now, we're going to carry that branding guideline through everything. And digital is becoming, as you know, so much more important to the work that we do today. And that is because your website is your digital billboard. It's a channel that you own wholly. You're the only ones who can put copy, images, messages, videos on your website. You control it start to finish. So it needs to represent fully what you do. It needs to represent your brand, your thoughts, your values. And it needs to visually and via copy and messaging reflect everything you do. It's the first place that people who are looking for information on you are likely to go, whether it's via a Google search or they got your website address and they're going to type it in directly. It's going to be the first place you go. So you want to make sure that their first digital impression of the work you do and what your organization stands for is accurate and represents your brand. Because people spend an average of 10 to 15 seconds on a page. And the human attention span is significantly decreasing every year. The interesting fact for you, the average attention span and memory length for a squirrel is 9 seconds. Right now, the human attention span is average 7. So you really have to make sure that your branding is right where people can see it and it sticks and it's consistent. So once you get to your homepage and you have your branding right there in your messaging, you're going to make sure that any news stories or social media, they're going to link back to your website there as well. So go ahead and use them and make sure that the link to your website provides additional branding opportunities. Carry your expertise throughout and make sure it's in your voice and it's in your graphics and it's in your messaging. So if you'll see here at the Red Cross, here's the work they do. And their colors are black, red, white, and gray. And that is what you see. And you see work clearly, dog tags, so you know right away they work with veterans and people who are deployed. You see a blood drive. Now you may know from memory and from their history that they work with blood drives and make sure that our hospitals and surgical centers have access to a healthy supply of blood for surgeries. Here's their disaster building or their disaster response vehicle. Many of you may know that the American Red Cross does deploy to disasters across the country and around the world. And then here's something that a lot of people are not aware of, but they do help with family reunification in times of disasters or conflict. So you click on here, their website, you see right away what they do, but it's also very consistent visually and how they speak about themselves. Habitat for Humanity was founded by President Jimmy Carter and his wife, Rosalind. And that's a very big part of their story. And so when they talk about their history, of course, Jimmy Carter is there. He's a large part of their history and what they're doing. So they're embracing that. They're carrying out their expertise. And if you continue through their website, they talk about housing insecurity, the cost of home ownership, why it's not feasible for everyday Americans, and ways and we could change policy to make it so. So they carry their expertise and their voice throughout. And then back to one of our favorites, PBS, trusted, valued, essential. And that is their branding. That's what they build everything around. So all three of these organizations are talking about their expertise and they're highlighting their work. They're very much highlighting the impact they make because they know that making sure that's part of their brand and telling you over and over and over again, you're going to remember it. Moving on into social media, smaller opportunity, same thing. But this is an opportunity for you to engage with your audience and use your same tone, your messaging, and stories from other materials can be reused here. Now, Feeding America does something really different with their social media because they are an association of sorts and they support food banks throughout the country. They often reshare a lot of their client work to boost visuals and to boost followers. But it's always around food and healthy food. So here, fresh, colorful fruits and veggies are just one of the nutritious foods that your neighbors can receive. Here are the photos of healthy fruit and vegetables in bulk that food banks are able to collect and secure with donations from Feeding America. This is very much on brand. These are the colors they use. They promote healthy food. They promote supporting your local food pantry. They support eliminating food insecurity. This is exactly who Feeding America is. They can use stories from their newsletters, or like I said, we share news clips and news links, and the visual identity, as I mentioned, is consistent. And one thing that anyone who works in social media knows is that you need to monitor and engage on your social channels on a regular basis. And you want part of your brand integrity to be responsiveness. You want to be known to respond in an appropriate amount of time, within a day, to a comment on social media. And then Ramsey's going to talk, oh no, just kidding. I'm going to talk about brand integrity also in the media. Cradles to Crayons is one of PCI's larger nonprofit clients, and they tackle clothing insecurity. That's their mission. They want, in the winter, they do coat and warm clothing drives for children in the Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia areas. And their messaging is all about clothing insecurity. They use it in their press release language. They use it in their talking points. They use it in stories and blog posts. And because they have been so consistent, that is why this headline here is Cradles to Crayons Tackles Clothing Insecurity Across Chicagoland. It was a very intentional campaign and effort between the Cradles to Crayons team with PCI's support to make sure that clothing insecurity is always referenced with Cradle to Crayons work. So, of course, clearly, outreach strategy should align with your core values. You want to go after media opportunities with media outlets that represent your values. You want to make sure you have a consistent media narrative. Again, Cradles to Crayons, C2C, tackles clothing insecurity in the cities that they operate in. That is always in the top 2 talking points that they are providing, and staff practice their elevator speech, which is Cradles to Crayons work to eliminate clothing insecurity across Chicago. If you come across, you land a media opportunity, which is fantastic, and celebrate that. Prepare for your media interview. Go over your talking points, practice, practice, practice. And after the interview and after publication of your media hit, make sure that it is correct. And if there are some inaccuracies, you want to reach out to that reporter or the producer you worked with to correct those inaccuracies, but be courteous and professional about it, and allow grace for a misunderstanding or an inaccuracy, but ask them please to update the record and correct it for you. Now, part of why branding is so important in protecting you against crisis is because people want to trust that you're doing the right thing if they hear something off about you. They hear that you're engaging in bad deeds, or executive is not living by the values that they purport to have. They want to believe that your brand is better than that, and they will give you grace for that if your communications and your values and your actions all align. And when that doesn't happen, that's when we prepare for crisis communications. You want to make sure your crisis communications plan, which is a whole nother process, aligns with what your brands are, which is you're here to serve the people that, or the community that you're impacting. In Cradles to Crayons example, Cradles to Crayons is here to end clothing insecurity. That is going to be at the top of their crisis communications messaging. And here are a couple of templates that we wanted to just show you quickly for to make sure that your brand goes across all communications pieces. There's a template here for a press release, some interview tip sheet, and then on the bottom half here is the social media posting schedule. And this is really, I have seen that Chris said he is it's a single person entity. And so creating and maintaining brand integrity is overwhelming. And it is. You're not alone, my friend. It is overwhelming. It's overwhelming for organizations that have 10 people in that department because it is so integral to what we do when we're serving others. Things like this should help you. Have the templates so you can just go back and you don't have to recreate the wheel. Once you spend time creating the templates of how you want things to look, how you want things to be said, when you want things to go out on social media, etc., that should help streamline some of your processes so it's not so overwhelming. We do recommend that you consider creating templates for letterheads, your staff and board bios, that they all look the same, that they sound the same. Boilerplate, that it's standard, that if, for Cradles to Crayons isn't doing, having a boilerplate just for, winter clothing drives for Gear Up for Winter, but they have a boilerplate for all of Cradles to Crayons seasonal drives. Definitely, you want to have brand templates for your program descriptions. You want people talking about your programs to talk about them the same way. Brochures, I mentioned press releases, emails, and signatures. I catch a lot of signatures and emails that are not the same coming from similar organizations, and it throws me off. So consider that as well. Definitely on any reports, especially if you have to submit reports to grant funders or state funders, you want your reports to be in a templatized version. That way it looks the same every time you give them a follow-up report, and any digital channels that you work on. if you do some of these templates, it should alleviate a good modicum of stress for you, and then that it's just ready for you to drop information in. All right, Ramsey.
All right, so we want to take another informal poll. So think about a time, a recent communication piece that you all have distributed to your audiences, whether it was an e-newsletter, a physical newsletter, a social post, a marketing postcard, a flyer. Think about that and think about what is one change you could have made to align it more closely with your organization's brand. And if you felt that it was great, please share why. You actually don't mind. I'm going to ask you a quick question about that consistent visual brand. In what way? Is it the logo, photos you're using, or the color scheme? Mhm. So this exercise, please do take this, from this webinar and take the time to look at some of your materials and audit and refresh. If you're going back to that drawing board and creating that process and developing guidelines, thank you. Please do, audit and refresh and make note of things that you have noticed that you want to shift, and make sure that that is documented in your guidelines and then disseminated to your team. Or if you're a single person entity, that you revisit it every time that you create a communication material. Yep, letterhead, that's important. Awesome.
In terms of legality as well, in terms, anytime you're dealing with legal issues, letterhead is key. So Allison, I wanted to follow up on, you said color scheme, making sure the color scheme stays aligned. Is it, color, do you have a dedicated color code, or is it something that, you do your color on Microsoft and it looks like this blue or that purple, or? Oh, okay. All right. See the logo creation. Yeah.
That is a very tough challenge to take on by yourself. That, the logo creation is something that, often we'll recommend if you have the resources to outsource or to partner with a branding, expert or consult. They can assist you with that, because sometimes, you're very ingrained in the organization and it's hard to take that step back and look at what is it that I really want people to take away from my logo. And an outside perspective can help guide that. But definitely we recommend in the interim, look at all of the iterations of the logos that you have created and see what is that consistency through that. And maybe that will help guide you to that final logo that you land on and use moving forward. Outdated website. Yep.
That's another hard one with nonprofit organizations, is getting the resources to bring that up to date. And as Ramsey has said consistently, it is a process. So you want to start at the very base and get your foundational pieces, and then you build out. Websites, because they require so much resources are often ones left to the end when you can get funding. Mm-hmm.
Consistent use throughout flyers and newsletters. And you are absolutely right. They should use the same color scheme. You should have, as we identify, we have several color palettes, but if you use any iteration of that, it should be consistent across the board in all of those communications, because people then, we get so many newsletters, especially if you send it through email, we get so many. And if they see your colors, it's like, well, that's the one that I want to open. So it even gets as granular as that, as, standing out, using those colors that are recognizable to make sure your audiences are engaging with you.
Mm-hmm.
And grants that will help with website redesign. Tia, not offhand, but we can certainly follow up with Morven and Mark with some resources if we are able to locate them. But I'm sure also Mark and team might have some other resources too for website redesign, but we could certainly give that some thought too.
Mm-hmm. And Carolyn, with the multiple logos for the projects within the organization, yes, I've worked for an organization that was dealing with that. One of the things that there was a suggestion that was made there is, can you, if your staff and your leadership decide that it's important that each program have their own logo, can it be a lockup logo with your organization's main logo, or main organization logo at the top, and then program for kids under the bottom, or whatever the program name is, or program for kids, a program of your organization, somehow to make sure that that will allow them to have their time in the sun, but also make it very clear to everybody that is a program of the larger organization as a whole. Oh, that's great. You guys are sharing info with each other. That's fantastic.
Love this. Well, I know we want to open it up to questions. So just a quick recap of what we have learned today. Again, branding is much more than a logo. It's an identity and promise to your audiences. We've talked a lot about trust and reputation and how brand integrity plays a huge role in building that. Everyone in your organization is responsible for upholding that brand integrity. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to take it from step 1 to step 10. And that starts with defining and documenting those guidelines, communicating those guidelines to everyone, assigning someone who is the keeper of those things, and continue to build from there. And then just easy ways to make your life easy, developing templates that just helps people adhere to those guidelines. It helps your partners adhere to those guidelines on your behalf, helps your staff adhere to those guidelines for their various programming. And the last here is just continue to do this work. It's not going to happen overnight. You have to keep at it consistently for it to make an impact, but it can make a huge impact on your business, your communication, and your impact goals. So we've gotten to the fun part of our presentation, Q&A. Would love to hear if there are any questions about anything we've shared, anything we didn't share, any resources. The floor is everyone's. If you want to drop it in the chat box, or if you want to go off of mute, the floor is yours. We want to hear from you. Talk about accessibility.
We often create brands for program series, like we'll offer a series each year, so many events, but we'll create a specific brand for that. Or a capital campaign, we created a sort of a look for that, or a tagline. Is there a way to, or can you speak a little bit about how to keep them consistent and recognizable with our overall brand?
Jackie, do you want to?
I can absolutely take that. So capital campaigns are a whole different beast, right, Sue? They're all consuming. and you're asking for a lot of money and a lot of attention. It's slightly different than a regular branding program that our recommendations today would align with. But some of the main fundamentals still exist. You want to make sure that your tagline and any graphics you create specifically for the capital campaign can be tied directly back to your logo. So perhaps your main color, like your organization's main color, and your secondary color palette for the capital campaign. Or if the capital campaign is to build a building or remodel or purchase land, that any graphics that you're using as part of what the building will look like can be a part of your branding for the campaign itself. And it could, again, be labeled as a program of a campaign to benefit the Western Illinois Museum, things of that nature. So it can be its own thing, but make sure that there is an opportunity to tie back. Your logo, your main institution logo should always be on the materials that go out about the capital campaign, even if it's not the main campaign logo. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Great question.
And so we had a question for talk about accessibility. This is another area where you do have to have a gauge on your audiences and what they need and how they are able to assess your information. And so if you know that within your audience, you might have folks who might need colors, or there might be other, maybe language barriers. Think about how you can make your materials helpful. So it maybe translation services, maybe your website has more accessibility built into it. That is a little bit more expensive, but it is something that can be done in the build of it. But you want to just have a gauge on what your audiences need, because there's so many areas of accessibility that you want to make sure you're meeting your audiences where they are versus really running the gamut of all accessibility within, because that can run up it could take up a lot of time if that is not something that your audiences need. And then two, you might have missed exactly what it is that your audience need if you're not talking with them and having that gauge. But yes, in terms of enough color contrast in the branded colors, that is, again, looking at, I guess, also, again, how they're being used online in your materials, all of those pieces. So it really depends, again, what your community needs in terms of assessing your information and getting your information. But it should be built into any brand guidelines in terms of the accessibility that you all offer and how to use them.
And that is, real quickly, that is something that more organizations are starting to have to address, because it's not something that as a society we even considered 5 years ago. So there will be a lot of organizations looking into making their brand, their services, how they speak, more accessible. Great question.
Any other questions or final thoughts? Oh, we have one hand.
Hi, this is Glenn. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, in terms of for an organization that already has disparate branding materials that are, sort of in separate places and aren't necessarily in communication with one another, what would be y'all's recommendations for where to start to make sure that things are aligned, and how to build out those those brand sheets that you were showing some of the examples of in one of the earlier slides?
Yeah, Jackie, let's tag team this. I think for starters, take an audit of all of those materials in the different departments who have various materials out there. So example, if you see a flyer that was for an education program, or you see one for an artistic program, pull those all together, put it in one place. So then you're then taking an audit of, oh wait, this is incorrect, this is incorrect, this is correct. And so you're building that repository of that information. And then when you go to put pen to paper in terms of the guidelines and what you want to be, you have a good starting point of what is already out there, and then can begin that cohesive narrative around, this is what everything should look like for your department. If you need it for this program, if you need it for this event, this is how you use it consistently across the board. So I would start with just gathering all of those materials as best as you can from the various departments. Also, having conversations with those departments would be helpful in understanding what their goals are with disseminating some of these materials. If you are going to be that person that's centralizing everything, you should have a gauge on what everyone needs in terms of communication materials, in terms of marketing materials, in terms of whatever those communications are. So then when you're creating those guidelines, you're also keeping in mind their goals and seeing how it aligns with the overall organization's goals.
Well, she stole my thunder with the have conversations. Absolutely have meetings, conversations with the people who are probably developing some of these materials. And a lot of, I have found, and we have found, is that the people will create these materials because they don't want to bother you. They know you are busy and they think they're helping you. So having a conversation with them to say, thank you, I appreciate that you're thinking of us and you want to, go ahead and take care of this and not have to worry or plan, for a 3-day turnaround. But here's how you can do it yourself and not bother us or think you're bothering us, and then provide them that template. But the conversation on what they want and why they want it and the purpose they're hoping it will serve will go a long way for you to streamline some things.
And it's a consistent conversation. If it's a monthly meeting that you're having with these various departments, those touch points make a difference. Also, understanding their needs in terms of their timeline of needing these materials will be helpful, because if you need to create a request form, you can create a form in which, if you need this from the communications department or you need something created, please, fill this out maybe 1 or 2 weeks in advance. This is what you can expect back from us in terms of that support, that approval, whatever it might be. But you can formalize a process for approvals to make sure that they're not feeling alone in having to create those materials, but then also you're not feeling overwhelmed with all of the requests that might come in.
And then you're not the bad person telling them, no, they can't use it, right? Because sometimes when we are in a situation where we're trying to standardize brand usage and integrity, and we're telling people they can't do something or they can't use something they created, we end up being the bad person in the situation. Having that conversation and setting expectations ahead of time will alleviate that situation.
So you have a question around if recommend doing testing or focus groups for developing brands. And Jackie, you do a lot of focus groups, so I'm going to turn to you on this one.
Sure, I do. One of the great parts of my job is that I do get to do so many discussion groups. Yes, you can do discussion groups and focus groups on your brand. There are organizations that solely do brand development, and that is a large part of what they do, because they talk to all of your stakeholders, staff members, board members, volunteers, clients or participants in your programs, funders, general community members in the areas that you serve. And they ask them all sorts of questions about your organization. What do they like about your organization? What makes you unique? What do you do really well? What is the purpose of what you do? What's the impact? What don't they like? What do they, if they were to pick 2 colors to describe, to color your world, what in the work that you do, what colors would those be? And it's a whole brand process. It's a whole process. And then that goes into design and creative work and tweaking. So yes, you can do a discussion group or a focus group around it. It's a lot. It's a long progress. It's a lot of money. But if you can get funding for it, it will put you on a good pathway for brand integrity. And then they give you those guidelines and they give you those templates. So it's not just a thought process. You do end up with deliverables. You have your logo, you have how, your boilerplate, you have all of that stuff. But it's something that you do need to plan for in terms of your budgeting process. If you want to go super cheap route, you could do a Survey Monkey type thing. But would recommend that you consult with branding experts on the types of questions you need to ask in that survey, so you get some actionable data. Don't go down this path without data. You're going to invest a lot of time and a lot of money in terms of staff and volunteer hours that you may not be happy with results. So make sure you get your data before you go down this pathway.
Another question around an optimal timeline for branding or logo change. We'll say that this is, if you're considering changing your logo or your branding, it should be consistent with your strategic plan for your organization. If you are in typically strategic plans, they cover a time frame of 3 to 5 years, where you're looking at your organization's long-term, short-term, short-ish term goals. But as you're looking at the evolution of your organization and your strategic goals of the organization, you might find that your brand or your logo, your visual look is not aligned with where you're headed. And so that will then prompt conversations around shifting your branding and your logo, your visual look, so then it does align with what you all want to be in the next 3 to 5 years as an organization. So that's the general range, when it becomes stale. Oftentimes, somebody might do one little tweak to a logo, might change a color palette just for, other reasons. But for the most part, we recommend that it's aligned with your strategic planning process. Using it.
Chris, that's a really good question. It could be 10,000 plus. It depends, and it depends on the scope of work you're looking for. If you go down that route, definitely either do, now you're a one-person entity, correct? Okay, so definitely get more than one estimate. Make sure that they are similar in what they're going to offer you, and have an opportunity to maybe start small and build upon. You don't have to do it all at once, because as we have said, it's a lot of time and a lot of money, but it can be a very expensive proposition, especially if being a one person entity.
And to build off of that, as Jackie said, be very, very specific about what it is you want to take from the process. If it's a logo, how are you going to use the logo? If it's a full rebrand of your organization, what do you want? What are some outcomes that you want from this process? If you are as clear about what your outcomes are of the process, that will help you vet who would be a good partner as you're looking through those multiple estimates. We'll definitely recommend having multiple, if it's a small agency, if it's an independent contractor, if it's a larger agency, just make sure that you have a clear understanding of what it is they can offer, but what you want out of the process.
And make sure they will provide you the customer service that you want. You don't want to, being a single entity, you don't want to be put off until they have time to do your work, because your work is just as valuable as everybody else's. So make sure that they value partnering with you as well.
And that they listen to you. This is, as a single person entity, you have the best gauge on it, but be open to the process, a two-way feedback. It is going to be a tough process, lots of questions, lots of tough questions. And so that customer service is going to go a long way if they are really approaching it with respect and nurturing you and through the process and understanding that it is going to be tough because you're the only person who has the keeper of that information. So take that temperature throughout the beginning, vetting of those organizations or folks that you end up working with for this. Any
I like
additional?
your background, by the way. I love seeing all the instruments.
It's the setup
Any-
for videos, so that's why there's guitars everywhere.
Love it. Are there any other questions? You guys have had great questions.
All right, well, if not, we are going to share the presentation deck with Morven and Mark, so you all should receive a copy of that. But thank you all for taking the time right before the holidays. Hopefully you all are logging off soon for the holiday break if you can. If you're traveling, we wish you safe travels and a happy new year. Thank you again.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.